Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's design webinar, continuing our theme of surfaces and texture for the month of March. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Mike Petersen, analyst with FloorQuest, as he presents Countertop Conundrums, navigating challenges, mistakes, and reworks in fabrication. Mike, please take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. As was mentioned, I'm Mike Petersen from Quest Interiors in Wisconsin, and I'm excited to talk to you today about countertop conundrums and navigating challenges, mistakes, and reworks as it pertains to countertop fabrication. A lot of the principles that I'm going to cover today and topics do apply to other areas of kitchen and bath, particularly cabinetry, maybe flooring, maybe lighting, maybe plumbing, a whole host of things, just kind of issues that we've run into here at Quest Interiors as of late, and how to track those and how to get better as a team when you're tracking them. So, as mentioned, what we're going to cover today is going to be, does this presentation even apply to my business if I do not fabricate countertops? As I mentioned, I think it does. I think it can apply to anyone that is in business or any project manager, designer, anyone who sees a project from the very beginning to the end. I will cover some examples of errors and reworks. You should care, or why should you care about errors and reworks? Ultimately, it's up to you. Reputation, money, time are all very important things to consider when running a project or a business. So that's kind of the nutshell why you should care. And then also how to implement, and what we've done with my company to try to implement and monitor our errors and reworks that we have in the business. A little bit about myself. I started in the flooring business in 1995, mainly doing warehouse and then some installation, limited sales. I've also held jobs in purchasing and also AP and AR. So I've kind of seen a lot of different positions. Since 2017, I've been with my current company as the fabrication manager, a cabinetry manager, warehouse manager, as well as doing large-scale purchasing and logistics and product sourcing. And also I do some of the marketing aspects that we happen to run into at Quest Interiors as well. Education-wise, I have a bachelor's degree from UW Green Bay, and then also a Juris Doctor from William Mitchell College of Law. Why you should pay attention to this presentation, even if your business is not fabrication. Ultimately, as I explained before, you're responsible for the project's success. You should be interested in the problem-solving aspect of it. You should also care about your quality control. You should be concerned about open and honest communication, not only amongst your team members and your employees or people in the field or people in the office, as well as open and honest communication with the customer, end user, or the contractor. Communication is so important to have projects run smoothly, and even when they don't run smoothly, communication is very important. So you're able to then, save your reputation. Also, you should pay attention to this presentation if you want to, basically help develop efficient and effective processes as you're moving and trying to grow your business. Everyone's trying to grow business, either if you're a designer or you're in the field, you're trying to better yourself, get in a better position. So you want to be efficient and effective in your job. And I think this presentation may cover a couple things that may be very helpful for that. So as I mentioned, with the company I work for currently, we started countertop fabrication a little less than 6 years ago. We had never participated in fabrication previously. And so what we learned as part of the growing pains, at that point, we had just done flooring and cabinetry. But in growing pains with countertop fabrication is because now we're taking over some of the manufacturing process. So what we discovered was that there were mistakes that were happening. Some of my cause, some of my teammates' cause as well, but there were mistakes that were happening, and we didn't really understand how those mistakes were impacting our business model, and impacting our day-to-day operations. The main question, when we really started to notice this after a couple months and some jobs are going well, some jobs could be improved upon, we would ask other people in the industry whether that be other vendors or whether that was, representatives of our, stone fabrication equipment or other installers. Hey, what should we expect for a rework percentage? That is, how much money are we going to spend compared to our delivered sales in issues that come up where things just aren't as perfect as they need to be? We were told percentages anywhere between 3 and 10%, is what I was told with what is, efficient. I also put, questions out on Facebook, in different groups, chat groups, and tried to, dial it in to see, hey, what is reasonable here? It should be 0, but we all know that everyone makes mistakes, so 0 is not necessarily going to happen. But we found that by doing this process, we've been able to dial in our efficiency to develop the true costs of mistakes, to kind of tweak and mold our processes so that we become the most efficient. And as I mentioned before, we were newbies to the industry, so we had really unknown industry challenges that we had to overcome. My team, and my owners, my bosses, my ownership, they had been in the flooring industry for longer than I have. So an incredible period of time. They understood how flooring works. Countertops, we understand the concept of it, but we didn't really understand kind of the day-to-day, nuts and bolts types of things to try to make us to be the most efficient and effective company out there. So what is a countertop conundrum? So in February 2022, Conundrum was the word of the day on dictionary.com, and it's anything that puzzles. So as I mentioned, we were puzzled as to what is a reasonable expectation of mistake percentage. So those can be measurement errors. They can be material defects. When you're talking countertop fabrication, it can be material-wise. It could be the silicone, epoxy. It could be a sink issue. It could also be, quartz or granite issues, installation issues, customer expectation issues. And as I mentioned, and I think which is important to note, is that this can really apply to cabinetry, flooring, or any other aspect of a kitchen and bath project. If you want to track it and track issues and you're seeing issues that are developing and you're like, hey, I think I've seen this before in my team, you want to be able to track it to try to figure out and dial in, is it a vendor you're having an issue with? Is it a particular installer? Or is it, that, you're measuring things incorrectly? You want to try to get to the bottom of it. And the best way is to take the hard data. Now, why we find it at my company important to monitor is, ultimately there is the issue of time. We only have so many employees and so much time in the day to be able to accomplish tasks. And we're scheduling installation crews very, very tight to be able to get to one job and get to the next job to be able to be as efficient as possible. So that is time. Reputation, I think that's super important. We find reputation in our business to be incredibly important, especially when it comes to, getting a review online or the word of mouth advertising. Reputation is super important, and one issue or one mistake and how you handle it can impact your reputation either in a good way or in a bad way. It can also affect culture and the mood of your workplace. If there are consistent mistakes that are happening, it can really drain employees' morale. And we find it important to kind of monitor that so that we can know that we have the very best version of our employees out there on any given day and time. Materials and money are kind of go hand in hand as well as with time. So we find that materials cost, a slab of quartz can cost upwards of $3,000-4,000. A slab of quartzite can be many times more that. So one mistake can be significant, and that runs, opposite to your bottom line, but also to point out that time can also, cost money. And then I have money in there separately, even though I've covered that, because there are times where customers or end users want discounts because of an issue that costs money, and money is really what brings us to work every day. It's really, what allows us to do what everyone loves to do in this industry, which is help people get the spaces in either their kitchens, baths, or the rest of their house, and help them get to where they want to be and help people see their vision. And then also mistakes happen. I'm not here to say that my company is perfect. It by no means is not, and everyone isn't perfect. It's kind of how you respond to the issues, reworks or other issues that come up. It's how you respond to them that matters. And you should monitor it because you want to know whether the same mistake is happening over and over again to try to figure it out. Now, the impact of reworks or issues, as I mentioned, it can have a huge issue with morale, as I mentioned in the slide before. It can also have increased labor costs. When you're talking about something from countertop fabrication where it goes, if you have a mistake, the installers have to be pulled off of the job, come back to the shop. A new material has to either be ordered or if it's fortunate to be in stock, has to be recut. And then the installers have to go back out to the field. So you're paying for travel time multiple times. You're paying for additional material. You're wasting material because a lot of times with a countertop, once you fabricate it, it really can't be used for anything else. There are some situations where you have a large island. If there's a mistake on that, of course, you can use it for bathroom vanities, but it still is a material waste. You can be short of material, as well, so that causes issues. The most important thing is that it can cause project delays and missed deadlines, which then can lead to the frustration of consumers or customers, consumers, fabricators, builders. And the last point, which I alluded to, which I think is super important, is the damage to your reputation and the customer relationships ultimately. So looking at the impact, it can make you angry, as the picture I have on the slide can be, and you can get super angry of the impact of the reworks and issues, but it goes beyond your anger and your frustration and kind of has this effect, a butterfly effect on other issues of your business that you may have not necessarily thought of as you're in the moment of dealing with one of these issues. It could be catastrophic, as the case would be with a significant countertop job that has to be entirely done, that's several slabs, or it could be relatively minor, which could be forgetting a sink that you're installing at a job site and forgetting it at the fabrication shop to install it to the job site, which then requires an additional person to drive it out to the job site. So those things can really have an impact of the rest of the culture, the morale of your company, as well as kind of how you're viewed in the industry and viewed by your competitors and also viewed by potential consumers, because word of mouth is very important and happens. That's how a lot of business is made, and that's how you get a lot of leads is by word of mouth. Just some examples of reworks or issues that we have ran into. Cabinet damage. That's where the cabinet is damaged beyond what we can use. A lot of times, like I said, I had supervised cabinetry before within my company, and a lot of our cabinet vendors, we don't manufacture cabinetry. We buy boxes basically from various manufacturers. So we've seen damage from various jobs. So what's the damage? Why is there damage? Who is the one responsible? Cabinet companies will oftentimes say, oh, well, we'll replace it. But then over time, if you're looking at this, you're like, wow, I've had 6 cabinet boxes replaced by vendor A over the last 3 months. Why is this happening? That's important because if there's no cabinet to install, you then likely delay other aspects of the project. It could be flooring, it could be countertops. It could also delay the installation and the final completion of the project because you now have to send someone back to finish up toe kick or a quarter round or crown molding. And then also it leaves the customer with an incomplete installation. So delivery damage, mismeasurement, as probably happens a fair amount in a lot of other fabricators, but then also can happen in measuring for cabinetry or even flooring, missing a splash height, the cabinet center or window center, wall length or stove opening. I just have an example of an image that I pulled off of House earlier today that shows, a faucet being centered in the window, drawn in by whoever the poster was. And then obviously a picture showing that the white shaker cabinet wasn't centered in the window. that causes frustration for the customer, for the installer, but you have to really track and figure out why that is happening. Other issues that we've run into, another image from house shows, a seam match issue in flooring. We've had it where carpet doesn't match, very similar to how stone or quartz may not match, whether that's attributable to a lack of inspection or that's attributable to a material quality or some other issue that is developed within the manufacturing process. So as kind of to go over that, anything can be a rework or an issue that you want to try to tighten up. So basically, when I use the term rework or issue, it doesn't necessarily mean the actual object or the countertop that is being installed. It could also include, the job site wasn't ready, so your templater had to come back another day, or it could be that there was other issues that were ran into and the job had to be rescheduled. You might be able to catch those and fill the void for your installer, but it also may cost you money because now instead of stopping along the way back, you're now making a separate trip. So all those things cost money, and money really is a loss of efficiency. And although a lot of installers and either cabinetry or countertop or flooring installers, a lot of them get either paid by the project or paid by the hour, they may not necessarily complain about having to make a return trip. But I can tell you, when you get down in the conversation with them, they don't love it. They may not complain about it because that's their job, but ultimately they'd rather get the job started one day and finish it the same day or finish it within the same group of days instead of keep going back to the job site, week after week after week, trying to finalize and finish it. So what we've found with some preventative measures and what I would call best practices of the company is really checklists. So what we created within the business that I work with currently is a checklist for everyone to follow on a folder. And so everyone has to check it off or initial. As every person that touches a specific countertop, that's what they have to do. The other thing that we have done to try to limit mistakes is double checking measurements and templates. So having someone have that extra oversight, because that extra 5 minutes, if they're looking at a computer screen or a drawing, may save thousands of dollars in the long run. Or also reminding your measure tech and if you're measuring for cabinetry, take the measurement of from each wall where the center of the window is. Then if you make a mistake, you're going to be able to figure it out. So that's why it's super important that we think double checking measurements is really important. Utilizing any sort of laser technology and other digital measuring tools is also a great thing. I know that we have a pretty good relationship with Laser Products, who's a digital templating software for our countertop side, but we use laser or technology all the time for measuring for flooring, for doing takeoffs, large scale commercial jobs. We'll use computer, but use those digital measuring tools because your mistakes will ultimately be lower if you're using those tools correctly and efficiently. Other things that we do is, implementing standardized procedures and checklists. So that is really, it kind of goes with the checklist thing because every job should look the same. So you want it to be where, the first time you have someone come to your job to work, they understand kind of what they have to follow and how it's done. Because then that 3 weeks from now, that employee is following the same process that you have employed, or the same procedure, and that everything is done the same. So when you get a call from a customer or a builder, you can answer it, for that person. And then this is the way I always do it. And that makes it much easier. Proper training and supervision of, measure techs and estimators, that is super important because they're your eyes and ears in the field. So they are the ones that will take pictures and see issues and develop solutions before you even step into the job site. They should be trained, efficiently and effectively for that, and they should be supervised. Check in with them regularly, see how their day is going, see what issues they're seeing, and have that communication be open. As far, installers, find skilled installers, keep them. Installers, we found it with some trades in the flooring or cabinetry or countertop. Some installers are really difficult to find and keep, and some installers are not that difficult to find and are still great installers. So once you develop an installer, listen to them. They're experts in the field. They know what goes on day to day, where you may not be in the field seeing that. The last point is super important, and that's follow-up calls. You don't know if an issue happened until you're told about it, and it's much easier to know of that issue, before the customer sends in their payment via check with a note saying everything was great, but this happened or that happened or this happened. Or worse, they put something out on a Google review or a Facebook review or anywhere, and they start saying that something happened that was wrong and you didn't deal with it correctly or how they wanted. By doing that follow-up call after the job is completed, that allows you to kind of stop any sort of further issues or damage. It's kind of damage control. And then what we've seen is that the reviews come in to say, there was this issue. However, they fixed it very quickly the same day. We've had it before where something has been mismeasured for template. Hey, there was something mismeasured for template, but they came back the next day and finished the installation. Everything looks great. You're better off providing follow-up calls and communicating with your customers than trying to hide anything. And that's what we've seen to help save that reputation. As I mentioned, the installers, you want to make sure that you have efficient, skilled labor. So that means evaluate the performance of the installers, focus any sort of training needs of the installers. I know that a lot of different vendors of ours have universities or academies that our installers can go to. Installers can be certified, flooring installers can be certified, CFI certified. In the quartz area, Cambria has an academy as well, or a university, I think, which for us in Wisconsin, it's only about a 4 or 5 hour drive over there. And then the installers can be trained right alongside Cambria installers. There's also other opportunities, tech schools, other web trainings or virtual trainings that you can do that can really help, hone in the skilled labor. You want to enhance your quality control. So you want to make sure that quality control is top of mind, that the installers aren't trying to hide anything, that they are, fixing issues as they see them. So for instance, in cabinetry, it would be a situation where, an installer unboxes a cabinet, they see a damage on the side panel of a cabinet, and then it's how they fix that. Do they just let it be? And then if they let it be, the homeowner then all of a sudden puts the blue tape on it after the fact, and then now you're trying to scramble to figure out what you're going to do. Or can they wax it or paint it on site and hide any sort of blemish? Blemishes happen. So it's all part of how it's responded to, and the getting to quality control being your primary focus. You also want to foster accountability. So what I mean by that is you want people to take pride in their work and to be held accountable. I used to think that accountability always was who can you point the blame at or blame on, but over time, if you have a really good workplace and good morale, accountability is really, do you take ownership in the good or ownership in the bad? And are you held accountable? Are you putting your name on something or doing something that you find, that you're doing the very best that you can do and taking the time that you need to take to complete the project? I just have a comic here that I had found a while ago and thought it was, kind of important or interesting when it came to quality control. It's just a comic that says, when I first got to the job, it took me all day to do quality control inspections. Now I do it in 10 minutes, sometimes 5, and then half the time I don't even bother. So we want to make sure that that's not what's happening in your job, on your job sites. And with your installers, even if they're not your installers, you want to make sure that if they are the contractors' installers, that they're following through and that they are, doing the quality control, the quality check, because they can save headaches down the road and do that. So that's why we think it's important that skilled labor is is by far a necessary thing with your business. The next, material quality. We on countertops do a pre and a post inspection. So we're inspecting countertop slabs before they are cut. A lot of times with that, the reason why we have to do that is because once we cut it, we can't put a claim in typically. So we want to inspect it to see if there's any issues first. By doing that pre-inspection, which oftentimes we'll use one of our slab cameras to take a picture of that slab and mark any sort of imperfections. We do that well away, not to delay the project, and be able to kind of figure out how we can rectify the situation. Is the layout just have to be a little bit different? Do we have to get a new slab from the vendor? Do we have to call the customer? How can we make sure we're doing things right? The post inspection would be after we do a job with for countertops, and after it's fabricated, we put it, after it's run through a machine. Are there any issues that developed as a result of that manufacturing process? We also want to ensure reputable suppliers, and I'll cover on that later. We only want to have the very best suppliers who are our teammates, and teammates can also mean pricing. It can mean reliable material. It can be service. All those things can have a really big impact on the supplier. And also understanding the material limitations and also proper handling techniques. So, with granite or quartzite, it's more fragile than quartz is. So our installers have to treat it differently, and we have to train them to treat it differently and know that, because, a broken granite slab still costs money. And so they have to handle it differently. So we have to make sure that it is of the best quality. For optimizing installation, or how we view our installation to be important, is that we take pictures, lots of pictures, before and after, and that allows the communication to really be in a visual form instead of a verbal or written. It also allows references for managers to go back and check on what happened and try to develop issues. As I mentioned, training your installation teams, that's really important. Clear communication and also quality control checks at each stage of that installation. So when it comes to, in cabinetry, you want to check off that all the boxes are there. That's the first quality control check. Because if you're missing a cabinet box because it wasn't delivered, that's an issue. You want to check after you're unboxing cabinets that there's no blemishes or issues that have to be reordered. Because if you can save a day or two on that, that can make a big difference in the long run. And maybe you can find a workaround. So looking at every stage for quality is really, really important. Now we're going to go into rework strategy. So we're going to go kind of in the main topic of my presentation here today. But, prevention should be number one. We want to prevent any sort of reworks from happening over and over again. If you're having the same issue where the same measure tech, and sorry to point out measure techs, but that's, I made mistakes doing that, and the individual I supervise, partially supervise here at my company, or the company I work for currently, he was watching today, and I guarantee he understands, that mistakes happen and that it's how you grow from them, but we want to prevent them. No one wants mistakes. We also want to assess and document those mistakes. So we want to be able to document them so we have that proof in the future if we need to have that, to be able to go to a vendor or have the one-on-one with the customer about an issue, or the one-on-one with an installer with the issue. We also want to assess, is it a big issue? Was it just an oversight one time, or was it something that continually happens and is essentially a pattern? We also want to be the most efficient. We want to have, clear communication, and ultimately we want to learn and improve. So we want to kind of get to the root of what is the cause of the problem and how we can ultimately fix the issue. So what I kind of want to go over, and I'm looking at some of my notes here just briefly, just to make sure I'm not covering anything. As I mentioned, prevention is key. We want to make sure that we are meticulous, we're detailed, and that we have experienced staff. When it comes to, other issues, we want to make sure that We're tracking that on the learn and improve, and then a continuous improvement. Are we improving, or are we taking steps back? What is the same issue continue to happen? I'm sorry. So we want to develop a really clear rework procedure. So how does that look in your workplace? And like I mentioned, we tried asking others within the industry what their percentage was for countertops and how we can learn from that. Was it 5% of delivered sales? Was it 10%? Was it 1%? You have to develop whatever it works for you. Turned out that it looked like to us, and I know that my sample size out of every fabricator out there was really small. However, it looked like to us that no one really knew. And they were just kind of like, well, as long as I'm making money, I'm making money. But we think you can be better than that. So developing a clear procedure allows you to, establish a system for identifying and documenting rework issues. You can assign responsibility for addressing and resolving the issue, and ultimately communicate with customers throughout the rework process. So if there is an issue where a slab is damaged or is flawed, you can communicate that to the customer right away and develop that process. How are you going to deal with reworks, not only internally, but also externally? The biggest thing also, and I mentioned, is to minimize your rework time. So we want to promptly, and that's something we weren't necessarily doing early on in our fabrication career, early on in the process, but efficiently scheduling and coordinating any sort of rework tasks. If there is an issue at a job site, send someone there that day and try to fix it. And if they can't fix it that day, do it the next day. And if you can't do it the next day, do it the day after. And if you can't do it then, you better have a really good reason why you can't rearrange your schedule to take care of a project that's not yet completed. Utilize your very best skilled labor and specialized equipment to get the task. Now, I mentioned that we started fabrication of countertops a little under 6 years ago. All of our equipment is the state of the art. We have very hands-off technology. Everything is water cut. Invest in those materials if you can, and that equipment if you can, because it will save you time in the long run, and it will allow you to become very efficient. So although it may seem like a large upfront cost, in the end, if you can kind of hone in on your skills, you can really be very, very efficient. And also implement a system for tracking rework costs and identifying areas of improvement. This is really what the nuts and bolts of my presentation are about, is kind of what does that system, look like? How can you do it? What does it look like? So what we do at Quest Interiors is we track our costs on a daily basis for issues. So this is done in a separate spreadsheet or something very, very different. We look at, what is the date? When is the date completed? Our system, we utilize RFMS, part of the Sinkley brands, because of our flooring background. So 2020 is integrated with as well. But so every one of our jobs has a CG number. It just stands for computer generated, but we have that for the internal tracking number of the job. What store? We have multiple different brick and mortar locations. So we want to know, are we encountering issues at store A or store B or store C or store D? And because it really allows you then to kind of filter it down and figure out, is the problem the store? What is the problem? What's the issue? The customer name, customer address, really just as reference, so we can kind of trigger that. Balance due. Now we added that column. Actually, it was added because we had discussions about it. We thought it was important to add, because ultimately, if there's a balance due to us, there should be a reason why we should want to prioritize getting that job complete. We just have that really for reference to make sure, hey, is there a trigger? As a trigger, is there anything we haven't yet finished at this job that may be why the customer isn't paying their bill? A salesperson, I have this as a drop-down box, so the salesperson is selected. Same thing. Is it the same salesperson that's running in the same issues? Material, that's super important. As I alluded to, we track what the material is. Is it something that we directly source? Is it from a vendor? What is the material? Because if there are any sort of patterns, we've had it with some vendors or some material where, color slabs aren't matching samples, or the finishes are not quite perfect for countertops. So you can try to see those trends and kind of go back on it without trying to joggle your memory. You have it right in front of you. What's the issue? Describe the issue of what we encountered, and then the responsible party, primary and secondary responsible party, and who are the team members of that. Who are the people that are responsible? And then lastly, the cost. What is the material cost and what is the installation cost? Because costs are super important, because it's money, and in the end, any extra cost that you have to put out on a job is a cost you're not necessarily able to charge the customer for. So it's eating away from your bottom line and eating away from your profit to be able to be a successful person. So you want to make sure that you're tracking all this information. So that's what we use to be able to track it. And we've created this for countertops as well as for cabinetry, as well to see what the issues are, to try to narrow it down and have the hard data that makes it easier then to be able to communicate with the stakeholders who are at issue. So ultimately, we also have a summary where this tracks what our costs are through a monthly or a yearly process. So we look at it and see how does this look? So it kind of totals all up. It can be a very sophisticated spreadsheet because of the formulas and the different tabs. But what we want to know is a couple of things. Hey, well, how much material cost did we spend this month? What's our labor cost this month on reworks or issues? And like I mentioned, that can and does include multiple trips to the job site. How does that look? Do we have to make multiple trips to the same builder because he's not ready? Do we have to make multiple trips to the job site because our installers keep forgetting something? Do we have to make multiple trips to the job site because we keep mismeasuring the same, cabinet wrong? Do we have to make multiple trips because a cabinet is damaged with this particular vendor over and over again? So we track material, labor, and then who's responsible. So I have the templater. This is tied to fabrication. So templater, the fabrication crew, so the ones who are operating the CNCs, doing the programming, handling the material in its raw form, and then the installers or installation. What you will see is that in countertop fabrication, the templater is the one who likely makes the most mistakes, and they can cost, a lot. And the main reason why that happens, I think, is because they're the ones who are measuring. So whatever their measurements are, or whatever is what happens. So if they're doing things really great, likely there's going to be no issues later on down the road. If something is a mistake as a templater, it's going to be very costly because it's not normally discovered until the job is being installed. So you've already fabricated all of that job, and you've sent an installation crew out to that job to install. So what we ultimately see a lot of times is that our templater, either myself or another templater, typically has a higher dollar figure for mistakes, just because they're the ones that they can make them. They're the ones at the field that are the first look at it. And once if anyone's not familiar with countertops, once you cut a countertop, it's very difficult, unless the countertop is cut big, it's very difficult to stretch a stone countertop to make it fit if you're too short. If anyone has an idea of how to do that, that would be super. It's $1 million idea for sure. And we also track manufacturer issues. And like I said, that is really when we discover an issue with a particular slab, we have to track that. So one of the things that we learned in doing the process that's a little bit different with claims and manufacturers, that's different than what it is for flooring, is that countertop companies or suppliers will typically have no problem saying, oh, there's an issue with my material, here's a free slab. Here's more material. Here's more material. And then when you ask for the plumbing to disconnect the sink, we don't do that. You ask for the labor for the fabrication, we don't do that either. You ask for, the extra trip charges, we don't do that. Where in flooring, it's relatively different. At least from my experience, most carpet mills and manufacturers will pay for, removal, disposal, additional new material, plumbing, any of those other hiccups that happen, they may not pay what your true costs are, but they're at least paying something. And countertops, they don't. So that's why we really want to track that with countertops, because we find that to be an out-of-pocket expense that really we can't recover or recoup from any of our vendors unless we really push the issue. The next column is delivered sales. So for that, we look at what our sales are delivered for the time in the job for the particular month. And then we can then get a percentage. What percentage of delivered sales is attributable to a specific person, party, or department. Like I said, this can be expanded onto 10 different columns if you wanted to. We've really narrowed it down to 3 things when it comes to fabrication, because we want to track to see what department or area really needs the most focus. So the templater or delivered sales, that these numbers are in here just as placeholders, but ultimately the templater has a percentage, fabrication is a percentage, and install is a percentage. And then what is the percent of reworks compared to our delivered sales? As I mentioned early on in the process, this was the root of what we had wanted, what we needed, what we absolutely wanted to make sure we were tracking. And what we've discovered over time is that, man, it fluctuates. Some months can be great. We can have some months be under 2%, under, close to 1% reworks. And then some months, it's under 5%. If it gets any higher than that, we typically call, an emergency meeting and talk with people and try to figure out how we can fix the issue right away, because we want to be able to kind of plan accordingly for that. So the percentage is important because that's the percentage of the job, the total delivered sale or the total delivered project, what the ultimate charges to your customer or consumer or contractor. What percent of that are you losing because of an issue or a rework? So, we track it by month or every month, and then we average it over the course of the year, and then have the spreadsheets do all the totaling for us. Like I mentioned, each one of these things are numbers that we put in manually, either from in this part of the spreadsheet or in the other part of the spreadsheet that I showed a few minutes ago. We still add the labor to jobs, and it goes to our profitability of our business. However, this just is kind of on a nutshell to be able to say, let's look at it from a a higher view, a higher point of view than getting into the actual account statement or the balance statement of your business. So that's why we like doing it this way. Now, ultimately, you need to figure out how to implement a reworks process. So first, you want to define what really the scope and the objectives are to your team. So you want to sit down with your team and your employees and really define what you're trying to accomplish here. Like, what is it? A lot of times the first reaction may be that you're trying to watch me, trying to get people in trouble, trying to, fire me. That may be the case. It may not be the case, but you want to hold everyone accountable and say everyone is responsible. So we hold our project managers responsible by holding them that we track if they make a mistake quoting a project. We track, whether, myself makes a mistake or whether it's the templater that also works with us or the fabrication manager. We have it as kind of part of our culture that, hey, we share our issues and mistakes with the team. You want to find an easy tracking method. So maybe the spreadsheet that I just showed you is a lot of work and doesn't really look like it would work. I'm going to tell you that at first it was difficult for us to use, but over time we've kind of, changed it and altered it and been able to make it work. We also assign specific individuals to track that information. So that is a couple of our people in the office that they will track, hey, we have to go back to a job site, and they may not completely fill out the information, but at least we have it down to know what we had to do. Did a sink have to get run? Was a sink damaged and we had to reorder it? Things that in the normal course of business you may just do as part of your job. Tracking that will see, hey, how can I, is my sink vendor the right vendor to use if 9 times out of 10 their sinks are damaged? Is that a good color? Should we be offering, matte or matte colored black quartz if every job is going to have an issue? It's those types of things that the individual can kind of track and keep and show that in a spreadsheet or some other some other program or whatever you decide to use. Implement it and train. As my boss indicates a lot, you have to give an assignment, you have to follow up on the assignment, and you have to keep following up on the assignment. So you have to give a deadline, you have to follow it, and you want to train your staff on it. You can't just roll it out without telling them what they have to do or how to do it, but you have to implement. Also be clear. When we have our meetings with our fabrication team, sometimes it's with every individual and sometimes it's just with the stakeholders or the leaders. We will pull up the spreadsheet and show it to everybody. And what we found by doing that is that then the installer or the helper, the lowest person on the pole when it comes to responsibility, they understand, hey, I can make a difference in this company. I do make a difference. We track that information, and also the highest people on that pole can make mistakes too. So we're all in it together and to grow and to learn. Also review it, like I mentioned, on a regular basis and improve. If there's a change, improve upon it. We added the manufacturer part after we got started. We were having some issues with some prior manufacturers that we wanted to make sure that we were covering. What we have learned, as I touched on a lot of this information before, but the problem areas are, human error is the largest because that does happen. Humans make mistakes. We're measuring everything by hand or using equipment. So there is definite human error with that. There's also equipment error. If you've ever talked to a fabrication shop and they've said, hey, for whatever reason, my CNC machine decided to drop a hole or run into the side of a countertop, or the saw quit working, that happens. Also environmental, that would be anything within your shop. So a piece falls off of a cart and breaks. That happens. A cabinet that you're unloading from a company, two people lose their grip of it and it falls and breaks. Those are problem areas that we have discovered over time, and that's why I've kind of put it in those three categories. It can also have it for a need for any focused training. So, and I know a lot of my experience has to come with, as the initial person that did the templating and programming for Quest when we first started fabrication, and now kind of handing that off to other people within the company. That specific focus training that is needed sometimes when there are the same issues happening over and over again. Hey, can we take a step back? When you're back early, can we focus on something to kind of get corrected? And do we have to do that, on a Saturday morning or do that at someone's house and to kind of take it away and have that specific one-on-one focus training to try to help with any sort of issues that we see? Also, as part of our process, we've learned our rework process that we need to be more specific sometimes. That's where that fabrication folder, we have an inspection checklist sheet that the fabricators fill out. We have other information too that we found over time we have to be more specific about. So we want to do that. And the only way we're able to really look at that is by looking at the data of any issues that come up. The next thing, individual assessments of employees, that's huge. You a lot of times may think that an employee that you supervise, an installer or technician, or even an office staff is doing a really great job because their sales numbers are wonderful, or doing a great job because they're a nice person to talk to. But if you track mistakes, that person may be making continual mistakes that you're not even aware of. But you want to be able to track it to try to help that person and try to help them be a better person and be a better employee for you. Vendor and material issues, we have discovered that as I talk to, finish issues on quartz slabs, excessive breaking of granite material, sink issues where we have a color of a granite composite sink that is frequently broken. So we can actually pull that away and not even offer that as an option. So we don't have those issues anymore. And that's really kind of a big thing that we've discovered with this process that we maybe weren't thinking that it was going to be something that we would ultimately discover. That was not a goal of ours to find. Our goal, as the last thing has shown, is that we want to know the actual rework percentage in our company. We want to be able to track that and see how we are. Are we better than our benchmark? Are we less than our benchmark? I will tell you that we typically are right around 2% on an average, maybe a little bit lower than that. We check it once a month. we want to be better. We want to be in that 1.5, 1 to 1.5%. We think that's the very best that we can be. But like I said, if you talk to other people, they will say that is 3%, maybe 10% as an actual rework. And then some people will say, I don't make any mistakes. Those people obviously either aren't very busy or somehow they're perfect. But I think everyone on this call today has probably made a mistake in their workplace, and there's a cost associated with that. You want to be able to track the number of errors over the time period. So why this is important is it's, money. Money is from your bottom line or from the order profitability. As I mentioned in the right in the beginning of the presentation, this can really apply to all other areas of your business. So it's important to not just focus in on, hey, I don't fabricate countertops. This conversation doesn't mean anything. I will tell you that I think it absolutely does, because it will let you hone in your business model to be the most efficient and effective person ever. So think about the mistakes. That's really what it needs to be. You have to think about what your mistakes are. You should solve them, but you should also think about the mistakes and then reflect upon those mistakes. The third point there is really create a culture of open communication. You want to make sure that you are, having an open communication with your employees, that your employees feel comfortable and coworkers feel comfortable talking with you, and that you feel comfortable talking with your coworkers or employees. I currently don't directly supervise any individuals within the company that I'm currently employed with, but that doesn't mean that I'm not looked to for guidance, or that doesn't mean that I don't talk to individuals and try to get them to be better versions of themselves and try to have them grow. And that also doesn't mean that I don't expect to have individuals come to me and say, hey, Mike, you got to do better at this. Or, hey, Mike, you should be more open. Or, hey, Mike, you have to make sure that you cover this aspect. So communication is also key. One of the things I learned in my communication classes back in college many years ago, but keep it simple. There's a method of communication called KISS. KISS communication. Keep it simple, stupid is what it stands for. But you want to just make the process be very, very simple, easy to understand. I hope that during this presentation that you've been able to kind of understand why I find this as being important, and that it's actually relatively simple to track, and it can be very specific, but it's as specific as you make it to be. But you want to just be able to track all those things, because although in the end of the day, the goal of my company is to provide, great style to a customer at a very good price with very, very good service. That's the company's model. That's what they want to do. That's what everyone wants to do. But it's more complex than that. When you get into an issue, keep it simple. Find the simplest path, take it, and then hopefully it will limit your expenses related to that issue. The last point I think is important during those meetings. Like I said, when we talk about, we celebrate our successes. If we've done something that's been good, or something that we've responded well, or we've had a month that's been good, there are successes that, we do celebrate those. And you could celebrate those with your team in a whole host of ways. There is the additional time off. There is additional money or compensation or bonuses, pizza party, so to speak. There's, a night out. There's tickets to a sporting event. There's all these other things of motivation. I'm in Wisconsin, so Packer tickets are hard to come by, and are typically a great way to celebrate the successes and have people look to the goal, and have them being really focused on quality control being the main aspect of your business. So now, I'm near the end of the presentation, just a little bit left, but, what have we gone over? I've gone over some measure issues, customer issues, communication, fabrication issues, installation issues that we have. How does this matter, or why does it matter? But, the KISS method of communication, track, and then also make sure you have accountability and meetings. You want to track all of your reworks and issues. The one thing that I may not have covered that I'm just recalling now, but one of the things that we've done a really good job of tracking as well is we have our project managers. They do a really great job. A lot of them are grew up in the flooring industry, so selling countertops may not be their primary role. So it's something new to them. So what we started at first, and we've gotten way better at that, is tracking when there are mistakes and sitting down with those project managers. Was it a communication? Was it a customer expectation issue? How can we try to grow to try to limit those issues? Because if the consumer is thinking they're getting one thing from the first time they walk into our store, and the installers come at the very end with something completely different, our whole process is messed up. So we want to make sure that that person at the very beginning is saying the same thing as the person at the very end. So we want to make sure that we're communicating that very, very simply to all of our customers through customer engagement and trainings of our staff. Having meetings, regular sales meetings, or individual meetings, or large scale meetings, or virtual meetings, however you find it to be necessary, having that communication, the accountability, if there are going to be tough conversations you have to have. Having those tough conversations will help you ultimately grow your business. A lot of times you'll find that a tough conversation that you are dreading and that you don't want to have actually turns into be a really good conversation. On a point on that, what we've discovered is have those conversations in person, not through email, maybe over the phone if you have to, but a personal communication when there is some sort of constructive feedback helps with morale within your team. Why? Why do you care? Why should you care about this? So money, that is the ultimate goal. That is what the impact can have. It does have a direct impact on the bottom line. Your reputation, it can have a direct impact on your reputation, like we had talked about. It can lead to a negative or a 1-star Google review, and it could lead to a very positive review. If there is a customer, and in my other profession that I had previously, but if there's someone that thinks that construction is going to run perfectly, that person, you should educate that person, because I've never had a project in my own house, and my wife and I added on a little over a year ago that went perfect. And most customer projects aren't going to go perfect. There might be some hang up. If they go perfect, that is wonderful. Then you've set that expectation and that you have exceeded your expectation, I mean. If it hasn't, then you want to build on that reputation. You'd rather have, Mrs. Smith at a dinner party saying, "Hey, look at my new countertops. Yeah, they brought in the first one, but it was mismeasured along between the fridge panel and the stove, and it was short by like 1/8 of an inch. But they came back the next day and fixed it with a larger piece. It looks phenomenal. I love it." And then if Mrs. Smith is telling that to Mrs. Jones, for example, and Mrs. Jones says, "Well, my house, I have an 1/8 inch or a 1/4 inch gap, and they just caulked it with white caulk, and it looks like horrible. It looks horrible. This looks way better." That reputation is significant. Yes, you make a mistake, but how can you learn? How can you fix that mistake? And then also your team morale. No one, my company has never made any decisions based upon that I can recall, based upon that someone's name is all over that report, so they must be, they must be terminated. We've never done that. But I can tell you that, when there are issues that come up in the same person, it becomes very frustrating. And it's just much easier to track that and have that communication right away instead of letting that build up where then, the damage is unable to be undone, unable to be fixed. So now, moving toward the end of the presentation, does anyone have any question and answers? If you do, please put them in the chat, and then we can try to answer them live.
What a wonderful presentation, Mike. We appreciate you sharing your insights and expertise on this topic. We have several audience questions, so let's dive right in. You talked about it a little bit, or I should say a lot, about customers and expectations. Can you address how you and your firm specifically talk to customers beforehand, just setting those expectations of possible issues, corrections? Do you set a game plan? Can you just go into that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, so what we do, as I mentioned, we do have we're primarily a flooring store first, and then we started fabrication 5 years ago, and we had a lot of education of our sales staff to be able to sell countertops and really any product that you sell. There's new products coming out every day. So really for us, it's education, it is supervision, it is training, um, and really devote the necessary time and resources to have the people who are having those conversations with customers, have them kind of to be educated about the process. When we started our fabrication process, we had every salesperson come to the fabrication shop and watch a job be fabricated, so they understood the process. We've encouraged a lot of our project managers to go to our vendors' production facilities, whether that be Cambria or Viaterra or Daltile domestically, and be able to understand how the product is made. We encourage them to go to installations and understand how the installers act, what they're doing. And we've really seen that once everyone can kind of see that they have been able to understand exactly, how to do their job better. So I hope that answered the question.
I think so. I think it's interesting when you're discussing internal education. So that way, all of your team members, whether they're on site or behind a desk, they know what goes into a job. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
Another question is, what are some of your quality control checks during each stage of installation? Even had a few people asking if you had a checklist that we could share with them.
Yeah, so I one of the things that when we first what about 6, 7 years ago, we did participate in RTA cabinetry, which for most of the people on this chat may know what that is. But just ready to assemble cabinetry where we were directly sourcing white shaker cabinets from overseas, and then we were essentially assembling them domestically and then either installing them or providing them to builders. We got out of that part because of the uh, tariffs that were put in place in 2018, 2019, 2020, and then the whole supply chain that I don't need to go into what happened 4 or 5 years ago. But what we learned for that was really we had to have all the information in one spot. So what we did is we took upon another industry, car dealerships, and the dealer jackets that are used for cars. And we have, for every job, we have a folder, and that folder is essentially a dealer jacket. We get those printed off, and the checklists are on that folder. So we don't have a separate piece of paper. Um, we do for the templater, but for everyone else, for the fabrication people, they can check it off, initial it, and that way we know who touched the job, when they touched it, and kind of look at it with the folder. And that was really helpful at the very beginning of doing that, to kind of see, if there are issues, what issues there were. But that dealer jacket is and I'm not saying like a winter jacket, or it's basically a manila folder that is sealed on 3 of the 4 sides, and then we just tuck the other paperwork into the folder. So it works out really well for us, and that's where the checklists are that we use on a consistent basis, because that folder then is used by the templater. They take it. In fact, I actually have one here that I have to go do a template on Thursday. But here's what it looks like. So it has the information on it. We print out the label of the job. It has everything else tracking on, and then that. So it has all the dates, this is kind of what is the most important. So although digital is where everything is going, digital iPads and tablets don't necessarily work in a fab shop where there's water and dust. Hopefully more water than dust, as the case is in our fab shop. But we found the dealer jacket to be the best option. So we get those printed just by a local print shop by us. So
That's amazing. And do your project managers, are they the ones that are keeping track of this? How did that kind of come to be as far as who is making sure that everything is on time, everything's going well? Do you have people specifically set for tracking that?
yeah, so we for tracking rework, so we have our salespeople, project managers sell the job, and then we actually have it where it's handed off to our fabrication department. So it's almost like a separate business, like if you're using a subcontractor. And that has helped us really kind of narrow down, the people who are touching orders. And then their responsibility is to communicate it back to the project managers and back to the customers. We're all one company, so we have internal tracking and communications and emails and chats and notes on orders and all kinds of other ways to communicate. But for us, by handing it off, then it's the responsibility for tracking the mistakes or issues. Then it's set on, the heads of the departments. And then, like I had mentioned, we had our meetings where we had all those people on a weekly basis where we said, hey, what goes well, what went well this week, what didn't go well this week. And by doing that, people can start to have ownership in the they can feel a sense of ownership, I guess, in the company, and be able to feel good about what they're doing and understand that any changes that are made are being made, efficiently, effectively. So
Amazing. I had a few people asking about the uh, folder that you showed. Is that
yeah,
possible to share? Maybe in our posts.
absolutely. It's something I designed real primitively on actually using I believe Excel or Google Sheets. And then we just, formulated it where it printed on two separate pages, told our printer to put it on the front and back, but I can absolutely share that file. And I can email that over to the NKBA, and they can share that information out as well.
Amazing. So everyone who's listening, you can expect to get that in the email following this webinar around 5 p.m. Eastern today. So Mike will make sure that we have those materials attached for you. And that's amazing. Thank you, Mike, for
Yeah,
being willing to share that.
yeah, no problem.
Um, and then I know you discussed the spreadsheet, you have the physical folder, you discussed that being easier, but someone asked if you use any apps or software programs at all to help you with this, or is it easier just with the spreadsheet and the folders?
Yeah, so what I've found and kind of what led me to want to do this discussion is that I was unable to find any specific app that really worked for us. Like I said, we're primarily a flooring store first, and then the fabrication is kind of, and cabinetry and fabrication, countertop fabrication has been added on over time. So our software we use for our business is RFMS. It is a flooring based software that was purchased by Syncly, which Syncly owns 2020. So there is some integration within the market share, but in the fabrication world, the software is different. It's mainly MoreAware is the primary player, and there's a couple other ones as well that we just haven't used for the job tracking because all of our accounting, everything of our company is in RFMS. So we've really been using RFMS for us. There are methods in that program you could do it as a claim, I guess, and be able to track it that way. But we really wanted to get kind of the nuts and bolts because we understand that issues happen, but we really wanted to make people, have people be aware of where those issues were happening. And kind of really narrow down the rework percentage because no one, like I said, it's all over the board. And really in this time, in this economy, 5% of your delivered sales, that's a huge bottom line issue. And so we want to, really dial that in. So that's why I thought the spreadsheet was the best option. And we have, like I said, there's 4 people that have access to editing the spreadsheet, many more people that can view it. But with the benefit of an online spreadsheet, whether Google Sheets or Office, is that you can then see who made the changes. So it's all present there, and you can look at the revisions in the history, and that's really been the big benefit. And also then you can screen capture or print off selected cells if you wanted to. So that's why we've used why we've settled on the spreadsheet for our monitoring.
Amazing. And we'll end with one last question. You're obviously tracking all of this information on Reworks. What is the number one reason that you're seeing you're getting reworks? Or is it, obviously it might ebb and flow, but is it measurements? Is it on-site damages? What is the number one thing that you're seeing most consistently?
Actually, it initially started out with really measurement errors or template errors. Those have kind of evolved. It does ebb and flow. Every month there's something new, and it's like, come on, I thought we covered this. But measurement errors, because that's the easiest mistake to make, right? Every job for countertops is measured independently, and differently, and it has the potential to have a very much a catastrophic effect on the job. So measuring is really where we focused a lot of attention on. The other place that we've seen kind of exceed sometimes has been in our fabrication or programming area, where if you understand programming, there's a lot of times where we have to mirror or flip jobs to be able to fabricate them upside down. And that obviously, if that step's not done, your whole job is fabricated, and then you realize that, oh my gosh, it's fabricated it's fabricated wrong. So that has been the other thing, but it's also been allowing us to track our manufacturing issues, where our manufacturers have had issues with finishes. What we saw through COVID and over the last 5 years is a product that was manufactured in 2019 likely used different materials or different finishes than something fabricated in 2025. So that has allowed us to look at our manufacturers closely as well and track that. So I would say measuring is probably number one. Number two would be programming, and then number three would probably be on-site, damages or breaking. We primarily fabricate quartz, so we don't really have the sink runs breaking because they're not supported or that type of thing. So we're kind of fortunate that way as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Mike. This has been great. We appreciate you again for joining and sharing all of this with us. Before we close out here, do you have any last remarks for our audience today?
No, I think one thing, I guess, just have the tough conversations in person, and don't be afraid to track this information and set up the expectations correctly. It's one other thing that we are just implementing in our company is electronic timekeeping to use an app. And that's the same thing. Everyone, including the owner, is on that app. So make it so everyone, there's a sense of ownership, and even the person who's least important on the hierarchy, I would almost make an argument as most important. But everyone has is responsible for doing it. So and they're not going to be they're not telling or snitching or whatever term you want to use on other people for mistakes, because we all want to be held to a higher standard, because that allows the company to be profitable, and also allows you to move up in the company as well. And the more that the company grows, the more opportunities there are for people within that company. So
Amazing. Well, thank you again, Mike, for your time, and a big thank you to our audience for joining. Until next time, thank you all and have an amazing day.
yes, thank you.